Hey guys, this is Russ. This is an excellent show we did with Marty, but I just wanted to, I completely forgot to ask him to explain to us what his background is. So this prologue basically is for me to explain his background. He sent it to me. So
rookie move.
Yeah, it was a rookie move. I know.
Hate to see it happen.
Yeah. We were just already in the conversation. We just rolled in here and started talking. So
yeah, that's right.
And we were just like, everybody knows who this guy is. Come
Had
on.
a couple G&Ts and boom.
Yeah, that's right.
Show on.
Yeah, so Marty is a 35-year veteran of the monster truck industry. He's the owner, designer, and builder of the legendary Overkill monster truck, winner of multiple national and world championships, author of the book Monster Truck Technology, The Definitive History of Monster Truck Evolution. He's also the vice president of the Monster Truck Racing Association and inductee into the International Monster Truck Hall of Fame. And in terms of UFOs, he's had a lifelong interest in the subject. He's actively studied the UFO phenomenon for over 30 years. He was a former investigator for MUFON and a former administrator of the UFO Conspiracy Forum for Fox's Encounters TV series. So that's Marty Garza, and that's who we interview. Well, we just talked to him the whole episode. So
Yep.
that's it. All right, guys, here we go.
UFOs in the Modern Era with Marty Garza on Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed, high atop the Edwards Plateau. We're having another special in-studio guest recording on the weekend. It's Sunday, and we got plenty of drinks and smokes.
That's right.
And we have Marty in here with us. What's up, buddy?
Doing all right. Snake Force is in the house.
That's right.
Yeah,
In the tangent cube.
Welcome to the cube.
Welcome to the cube, buddy. Yeah, so he showed up earlier in the afternoon, and we've been kind of hanging out, talking ancient stuff as usual, talking Snake Bros stuff. And we wanted to record an episode because you so Kyle and I are interested in the phenomenon of UFOs and whatever they are. You know, I'm like on this. I love Valet's take on it. That's really, he changed my whole world, right? And so I don't know if it's spiritual or consciousness based or whatever's happening, but you have been involved in researching it and just watching what people say about it for way longer than we have. So we kind of wanted to get you in here to talk about it because we've been wanting to, because of the recent stuff happening, right, with the Pentagon stuff and the videos coming out and this whole To the Stars and everything, that this is kind of in the news right now. And we were like, we need to do a UFO show. We've never done a show that's totally about that subject. And since you came into the Discord and we started hanging out, I'm like, okay, this guy knows his stuff. He actually lives right close by. So I was like, come down here and tell us what you know. So, go.
Well, first of all, you referred to me as a researcher, and I want to set the record straight. I don't consider myself a researcher on the subject.
Right.
I am an observer of the phenomenon and the investigations surrounding it. So I kind of have...
You're an armchair researcher, right?
Well, I'm an observer of the armchair researchers.
Okay, all right. All right.
As well as the phenomenon itself. Trying to assemble all of the different observations made by all these different researchers and trying to organize them in somewhat of a cohesive picture.
Yeah.
Which is very difficult to do because, as you know, this is a phenomenon that touches on so many different facets of the technological side and the spiritual side and the consciousness side, and it's something that is very difficult to wrap our heads around because we have a tendency to gravitate towards certain aspects of the phenomenon that maybe we're more familiar with or more comfortable with, and we tend to focus on that aspect and ignore all the other. And I don't think you can get a good feel for what's going on just segregating it like that. You have to have this all-encompassing view of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a like you have to come into it with as little bias as possible, right? You can't have any kind of preconceived ideas of what it might be because it's so strange and so wide ranging. But that's what happens to everybody, right? When I first started looking at this, I'm like, it's aliens coming from space. And I don't know if that's probably not been what everybody has thought, and that's definitely not what's been everybody's thought about it since the beginning of time, because this stuff has been happening for a long time, I think. But that's definitely how I first came into it. I'm like, these are aliens flying ships around in our sky. But the more you dive into it, the more you start to realize, well, that doesn't really fit the whole phenomena. And that's when it becomes a lot more, less black and white, more nebulous.
Yeah, I think that it is interpreted based on the mindset of the period. I believe the phenomenon has existed throughout human history.
Yeah.
And it has just been described in different ways. We have to recognize that a lot of the terminology that we use didn't exist in ancient times. So they would have been describing what they were seeing based on things they were familiar with.
Right.
And I think that same is true even in the 1800s, even in the early 1900s. There are rather consistent reports of phenomena that match exactly what the reports we see today. They're just using terminology that is more relevant to the technologies or the sensitivities of the individuals at that period.
Right. So like the airship sightings, or if you go back even farther, where people were actually seeing what they talked about as being boats, like ships as in ocean-going ships in the sky. Like there's even one
Chariots in the sky?
Yeah, well, there's even one I remember reading where, it seemed the report is, and this might be in the Magonia book, the Passport to Magonia, where it drops an anchor, and then the anchor gets stuck somewhere near the church, and then like some guy comes out of the ship, climbs down the chain like he's swimming down to figure out what the anchor is stuck on. There's these weird reports throughout time, and you're like, wait a minute, it looked to them like a sailing ship in the sky.
Imagine trying to describe an event using terms you're familiar with for something that you're struggling to understand. It's there. In other words, you can't say, well, it was a rocket shape or a saucer shape, or if those things didn't exist, you can't. The airship sightings, they were describing what we would, I guess, today consider cigar-shaped objects.
Yeah.
And dirigibles had existed since the early 1800s, so it's understandable that would be the most easily referenced shape you would see in the sky.
Right.
Now, Zeppelins didn't exist yet. They didn't exist for about another
So what's the difference?
7 years. In other words, a rigid airship versus a balloon, effectively. So, but interestingly enough, those sightings of the airships, there was a lot of consistency, and one of the consistencies was spotlights.
Right.
They would consistently report spotlights searching the ground. Very often, they were reported as having crews that were humans.
Yeah.
Although I have a really interesting report that I dug up that throws you for a loop because it is so similar to what is being described now, and it's not generally what we would consider the typical airship or mystery airship type sighting.
So you're saying that it actually follows along with things that we see today, as opposed to being a cigar shape.
Well, I'll read this to you. This is a little synopsis of the sighting.
Okay.
And see how many things you can pick out of this.
All right.
That sound like what we're hearing today.
Okay.
This incident occurred on April 19th, 1897. A gentleman named Alexander Hamilton in Yates Center, Kansas, outside of Kansas City, was awakened by a noise made by his cattle. When he went outside to see what was causing the disturbance, he observed a 300-foot-long cigar-shaped airship, quote, in quotes, with 3 lights descending over his corral. He rushed back in his house and awakened his son and his ranch hand, and the 3 ran out with axes. They came within 50 yards of the craft, and as they approached, they noticed an undercarriage made of, quote, made of panels of glass, which were brilliantly lit from inside. Visible inside were 2 men, a woman, and 3 children described as the strangest beings he had ever seen. A huge beam of light was shown at them, and then a great, quote, great turbine wheel about 30 feet in diameter slowly began revolving below the craft, and it began to buzz, sounding precisely like the cylinder of a separator, and the vessel rose as lightly as a bird, unquote. At an altitude of about 300 feet, it stopped and hovered over a 2-year-old heifer that was trapped in a fence. The men tried frantically to release the animal, but the heifer slowly began to rise as the craft ascended, and they both disappeared into the sky.
Whoa.
The next morning, Hamilton went out searching for the animal on horseback. After searching all day, as he returned home, the neighboring ranch owner, Link Thomas, informed him that he had found the hide, head, and legs of a heifer with Hamilton's brand in his field that had appeared to have been drawn and quartered. Hamilton was considered a man of unquestionable veracity and was a former House Senate representative who was widely known in the area. After the incident, 12 prominent residents signed an affidavit attesting to Hamilton's honesty.
Yeah.
Wow.
Man, that's that's a classic story too. Like it picks up the cow. That's really
Right. So you have a cigar-shaped object or airship shining beams with an undercarriage made of glass. That's a...
Immediately I thought of the Book of Enoch.
Oh, yeah.
He goes into a room that's made of glass it's illuminated behind the glass.
Yeah,
that takes him up, and he sees all the gates and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Then he talks about this 30-foot diameter spinning wheel, which immediately reminded me of Ezekiel.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have the cattle.
The cattle mutilations thing, But also the 3 lights, like I was saying, a lot of people see, these 3 lights in the sky. That's where you get the idea of these triangular 3 lights moving together.
What was the year on this? What was it
April
again?
19th, 1897.
1897, yeah. Wow. And they find the cow drawn and quartered, is that what they said?
Yes.
Do you think that's just their offhanded description of what was probably more like a mutilation?
Well, he says that they found the head and hindquarters separate. So apparently the majority of the cow was missing.
Oh, wow.
But that's the earliest reference to any sort of cattle mutilation or that I've found.
Okay, yeah.
But
I know the earliest one I don't know the date of it, but I know the first mutilation that kind of made big news and sort of kicked off in the same way that Kenneth's sighting sort of kicked off the new UFO phenomena and the flying saucers and stuff was actually a horse, right?
Smiley.
That's right. It was Smiley, belonged to a girl, and they found the horse in the same sort of with parts of the jaw, the anus cord out, whatever, eyeballs gone. They found the horse in that condition, and that was what started the cattle mutilation flap that's more modern.
According to Gordon Lohr Jr., Assistant Director of NICAP, which was the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, between 1896 and 1897, there were over 1,000 sightings across the U.S., and following their investigations, at least 200 of them were considered unsolvable.
Wow. So, but and he says that there were the beings in there, they had children, and they were the strangest...
Quote, the strangest beings
he's
he had
ever
seen.
Man. I wish it was a better description than that.
You know, but there are many instances of witnesses describing seeing, for example, Betty and Barney Hill.
Yeah.
They saw what they thought were people looking out the windows at them.
That's right.
The Father Gus sighting, he observed, not only did he observe what he thought were people in the craft, he waved to them and they waved back.
Okay, so that implies an understanding of the semaphore, right? Like, yeah, a truly alien being wouldn't know what that motion was. You know, you wave your hand, they're like, oh my God, he's trying to kill us.
Unless they've been visiting us for thousands of years.
For thousands of years, yeah. Yeah. What do you think? You think they're people?
That's a really difficult question. There's ample evidence in terms of anecdotal evidence, I guess you could say, that would suggest that we're dealing with more than one thing.
Yes, totally agree with that.
There is definitely a technological nuts and bolts component to this, but at the same time, there are plenty of instances of things that are just patently absurd,
right?
That do not fit within the, our general sense of what a quote alien would, unquote, would be doing. These appear to be either some form of consciousness, some form of interdimensional type being. There's something else. Then again, there is also the distinct possibility that these strange or anomalous type sightings or incidents are more along the lines of a projection to deceive or to somehow impress the witness in a way that
hides what's really happening.
it's deep, right? It's a form of deception.
Yeah.
Or it could be someone's inability to rationalize what they're seeing. They're trying. Their brain is desperately trying to grasp at something they can hang on to be able to make sense out of what they're seeing.
Yeah.
So Enoch describes meeting, what he calls angels, these beings that are obviously they're like humans in a way. And they take him and they're talking to him and they're doing all this stuff. They take him eventually to the Most High. And that being is light, and it's so overwhelming he can't look directly at it. And that's like, in his interpretation, that he was talking to God. God's telling him stuff to do or whatever, but he's just like, he was completely made of light, and he just can't even,
Can't
I'm averting my eyes, oh Lord.
Yeah.
So it's weird.
What are you doing now?
Yeah. So it's, from the description of this crystalline room that he goes inside of, it's sort of like this high technology, these angelic beings, all the way to some being that's just pure light that he can't even comprehend and can't even look at it.
There have been many people that have gone through, religious scripture and tried to pick out things or pointed out things that could have been in misinterpretation. A lot of times people would see, angels or demons or, there's all sorts of different, throughout the ages, there have been different types of things that have said to come into bedrooms and, impregnate women. And again, those may have been just their version of what we today consider an alien abduction or some type of an alien encounter. Again, it could be all perceptual differences.
Yeah. Well, I just wonder about the if it is a pure deception, what's the reason for the cow? Like what they're actually doing something to the animal there.
Well,
and that does continue.
One thing we got to be very cautious with is not to try to use what we would consider logic and apply it to
you're right.
something else, because we may be incapable of understanding what's going on. It could be something that's completely beyond our ability to recognize.
Yeah, that's true. And I have also read reports in when I was looking at the mutilation stuff. This isn't hard. You don't see this very many places, but people who have really done dives into the mutilation thing, there are plenty of other animals that have been found in that with the same kind of mutilation that are domestic, right? Like, I don't know. I do think that I remember seeing something about some people have found rabbits that are like that, with the same sort of surgical precision of parts removed. But it's cats and dogs that are found this way too. So it's like these animals that we have domesticated, like a cow. Now a cow is a source of food also, so people think that may have something to do with it. But these animals that are surrounding us, because we have sort of brought them into our world and by hybridization and breeding have changed them into something that they weren't in the natural realm, are the ones that get mutilated the most often. Unless it's happening in the woods all the time and we just don't know it. I mean, that's totally possible that deer and stuff in the woods are also, this is also happening. It's just when people notice when it happens to their pet or to their cattle, right? So.
Well, and we have the ability to recount experiences where the animals can't.
Right, yeah. That's right. That's what I'm saying. So we notice when it happens to our pets, like a cat or a dog, or to our horses or to our cattle, but would people notice if it was happening to deer in the forest? I don't know.
The abduction, phenomenon, that's a really sensitive area also that a lot of researchers stay clear of because it's really hard to accept.
Yeah.
But you look at the statistics, there have been several polls taken, Gallup polls and a few others, and they range. There's a pretty broad range in the percentage, but even if you take on the low end, the lowest poll I've seen said that 0.3% of the population believes that they've been abducted by some form of entity.
Yeah.
On the high side, I've seen as much as 2% of the population. So you're talking about somewhere between
2% of the population in the United States. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're talking something like 600,000, between 600,000 and 4.5 million people.
Wow.
Have this same delusion. So even if that is the case and it's some form of delusion, why is there consistency in the delusion?
Yeah.
That alone is worth investigating.
Yes. Yeah, and when we were talking about this earlier, I was thinking of, maybe the watcher can figure this out. There's a type of thing that happens to people where they suddenly become convinced that their loved ones are imposters. Watcher, you know what I'm talking about? There's a name for it. And it's similar across all these cases, and it's a psychological thing where all of a sudden somebody just becomes convinced that everybody that is in their family or whatever, they've been replaced by exact lookalikes who aren't really the people that they love. Now that's a really strange thing to happen to somebody, but it's always the same across all these cases. Now I'm not trying to argue that we have that these 4.5 million, between 600,000 to 4.5 million people who think they might have been abducted have some kind of mental problem. I'm just saying that it is possible to have very similar, very specific, whatever you would call them. I don't know if it's delusion is the right word. And of course,
Capgras syndrome.
Yes, Capgras.
Capgras.
Yeah, imposter syndrome or Capgras delusion. So what he's saying now. Standard model scriptards have said, well, you're just deluded. Well, how do we know? Maybe those people really have been replaced. I mean, what's who knows what's really happening? But it comes on suddenly, and it's a very strange thing. Maybe it's an effect of something else.
I guess I look at it like this: if one day your neighbor came and told you that they saw a suspicious individual in your backyard, you'd probably be concerned.
Yeah.
Now, if, let's say, you saw someone suspicious in your neighbor's backyard,
Uh-huh.
your neighbor would probably be concerned.
Yeah.
if the police reported seeing suspicious people in your neighborhood,
Yeah.
you would be concerned.
Yeah.
If the military,
Yeah.
told,
Yeah.
put out a statement saying that they had seen suspicious people over or in secure military installations, you would be concerned. So if all these things are would be cause for concern, how can they then turn around and say there's
no
nothing
cause
to worry
for
about?
concern? Yeah.
Right. Because it's indisputable that people are reporting these things.
Right.
That's not in question here. What's in question is what is it?
Right.
They're saying they're prosaic explanations, and we're saying, well, maybe when there's consistency again, and we'll touch upon this and maybe in the next segment, but one of the tactics that is very often used to discredit sightings is they take individual sightings as standalone cases.
Yep.
They will not, very rarely will they, and I've got some really good examples of it, but very rarely will they take two different individual reports that are describing the same object where they can triangulate and make estimations for size and altitude and all.
Yeah.
Generally, they're taken as individuals, and you'll very often find in like Blue Book reports and all that they will have one explanation for one and a completely different explanation for the other, even though they happened simultaneously. They were describing the same object in the same area. So that's where this overview is important, but not only for a specific sighting, but for a pattern of sightings over decades or maybe centuries.
Yeah.
When you're seeing this consistency of what these people are describing having seen.
Yeah.
So we read that, Russ read that article you sent us, and we're looking at that, how long this has been going on, the things that they were saying way back. I can't remember what the year was.
You talk about the Life magazine thing?
Yeah. Where they're saying, report these and you won't be ridiculed and blah, 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 blah.
It's like,
And of course, the story we've seen that you can see that unfolded after that with sightings and how people were ridiculed and everything. And then what's going on now where the government is basically saying, yes, we have been looking at this and that's all coming out. The question in my mind is this all like, it's just strange to me how the government is sort of wrapped up in this investigation, and it makes the whole thing seem like a psyop. Are they, what is the motive for what's happening right now? What do you think?
I think to best answer that question, it's important to recognize the history of this, going back to the beginning of the modern era of UFO sightings, and observe the pattern of behavior on the part of the Air Force and the U.S. government, as well as other governments. There are several key indicators of the things that were being done behind the scenes that give us a feeling for what it was that they really intended to do with. I'll explain. First of all, very often you will hear references to. In fact, Linda Zimmerman made reference to the War of the Worlds.
Yeah,
and talking about how not only the mass hysteria aspect, but the fact that it may have caused the beginning of people reporting, things in the skies, right? Well, Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers comics were out several years before that.
Yeah.
And they were already covering, rockets and things like that. That didn't exist yet, of course.
Yeah.
And yet it wasn't until 1947, 10 years after the War of the Worlds, or 9 years after the War of the Worlds, that the first, highly publicized UFO sighting, Kenneth Arnold sighting, occurred.
Yeah.
And shortly after that, there were widespread reports, but there were things that were going on that caused that. I mean, it wasn't the public that was necessarily driving all of the sightings. For example, I personally believe that one of the if you want to be convinced that there is a legitimate basis for the existence of the phenomenon, and that it may be something more than just some prosaic events that are not properly recognized. Edward Ruppelt's book. Edward Ruppelt was the head of Project Blue Book.
Yeah.
He wrote a book called The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects. And he was hand-tied, I'm sure, in what he could and could not say.
Yeah.
But if you read between the lines, and not even that, if you read what he says, he is pretty definitive about the things that he saw. And he brings up several very important points. One of them that struck me, I think most people are probably familiar with the Kenneth Arnold sighting.
Yeah.
And that was June 24th, 1947.
Yeah, and the War of the Worlds you're talking about is the broadcast, the radio broadcast of the story that caused some hysteria in some people.
Trial balloon.
Well,
Yeah.
keep in mind, here's another, this context thing of keeping things in context. Understand that War of the Worlds was a radio broadcast that was a 1-hour broadcast.
Yeah.
This was in the age before cassette tapes or VCRs
no
or
recording, yeah.
YouTube. In other words, only the people that were listening at that time heard the broadcast.
Yeah.
And 70% of the people polled. Roper polls began in 1935. So they started 2 years before, 4 years before the War of the Worlds. So they actually conducted a poll. 70% of the people that heard the show knew it was a radio show.
Yeah.
It was not really happening.
Everybody who tuned in a little too late
Right.
just started hearing it as a news broadcast because that's how it's sort of presented. But if you tuned in too late to hear the intro to where you understood it was a story, you think it's a real news broadcast.
Right. But
Must have been awesome.
but even then, there have been some studies about that. I'm trying to pull up my.
But don't they use that as an excuse? I've seen this as an excuse, like, oh, if people thought this was real, or if the government admitted that it was real, then there would be this mass hysteria that people would flip out. There would be religious crazies, and I've seen all kinds of explanations like that. This is why the government won't say it's real.
Right. For 70 plus years, we've heard that the mass panic aspect is the reason for the secrecy.
Right.
Okay. Well, media historian Joseph Campbell did a study, and he states that the panic and mass hysteria so readily associated with War of the Worlds did not occur on anything approaching a nationwide dimension. He quotes Robert E. Bartholomew, an authority on mass panic outbreaks, as having said, there is a, quote, there is a great consensus among sociologists that the extent of the panic was greatly exaggerated, unquote. So that begs the question, when did the exaggeration begin?
Yeah.
And for what purpose?
Right.
That's what I'm saying. It's trial balloon.
Yeah.
Like, the whole War of the Worlds thing was like, okay, let's see what happens. We'll say this is a story, but we know people will not get the beginning, and we'll see how bad the mass hysteria is. And it wasn't as bad as they thought it was, so then they went ahead and just
claimed that it was
really bad, even though, okay, so assuming that they actually are researching this and have come to the conclusion that we are being visited by beings from other worlds.
Yeah.
Run the trial balloon, and then basically use it. Okay, so it could be multifaceted. It could have been used to create hysteria that they could then say it's hysteria.
Yeah.
And so when it didn't create enough hysteria, they hyped how much hysteria it did. He's saying they've. Yeah,
it did kind of. Yeah, they blew it up.
They blew it up so that then that sort of creates this thing that's like, oh yeah, people are just seeing things because of that radio show.
They created hysteria about the hysteria that didn't actually exist.
That's right.
Well, what was actually going on at the Air Force might have been a little bit different than what we might be perceived from the outside, according to Ruppelt. Following Kenneth Arnold's sighting, he claimed that the objects were 45 to 50 feet in diameter, traveling at an estimated speed of 1,700 miles an hour. Immediately, the ATIC, which is the Air Tactical Intelligence Center, tried to downplay the sighting and say, no, you were seeing military jets. They were much closer. They were only going 400 miles an hour. But that theory was shot down because Arnold, for one, if the aircraft were that close, he would have very easily identified them.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, he was very specific that they passed behind the mountains and not in front. So based on the distance, the objects, not only was the speed accurate, but if anything, his estimations in size were probably off. The objects may have been slightly larger than he was expecting.
Yeah.
Than what he claimed. Then, just a couple of days after, on June 28th, the Air Force had a report of a F-51 fighter over Lake Mead in Nevada. The pilot witnessed 5 to 6 UFOs flying off his right wing in broad daylight at 3:15 in the afternoon. So the reports started piling up very quickly. Maxwell Air Force Base on June 28th had a sighting of a this was a light, which, that's a little more questionable, but it was a zigzagging light with bursts of speed making 90-degree turns.
Whoa.
Seen it.
Yep.
Totally have seen that.
Here's something, just a little paragraph, just a little sentence in that book that, and I've read the book 2 or 3 times, and I didn't even pick up on this until just recently.
Yeah, he brought his books. They're pretty worn.
I have the original version because some things were changed later, which that might be a cause for pause. But Ruppelt states this. This is pretty interesting. He says that he was told when he was. Remember, let me
give some context.
That at the beginning, shortly after Arnold's sighting, ATIC actually asked for there to be a project to investigate UFOs within the Air Force, a secret project. It was called Project Sign. Project Sign got started, and Ruppelt joined later. But he was told, he says this in the book, he says he was told that the incident which took place on July 8th, 1947 at Muroc Air Force Base was what kicked the Air Force's interest in the phenomenon into high gear. Very specific of the date, July 8th, 1947. Coincidentally, that's the exact date that Walter Haut issued the press release stating that RAFF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region.
Oh, hey. Wow.
Very interesting that Ruppelt pointed out that date.
Yeah. All right, everybody think about that while we take a break. I'm going to be thinking about that. We'll be right back with more Marty!
Snacks! We are back, Brothers of the Serpent podcast, here with the UFO researcher extraordinaire, thrice removed, Marty, taking us down the UFO rabbit hole, and
talking history.
Yeah, that's
history
true.
of the modern era right now.
Yeah. So during the break, I was wanting you to tell me again the connection there with the.
With the date and the...
Yeah, I found it really interesting that Ruppelt went out of his way to specifically name that date, July 8th, 1947. And it maybe legitimately there may have been another event that caused concern to the Air Force, but
at some Air Force base, and it's secret still.
Right.
Yeah, because they weren't specific about location or anything, but it kind of
he does mention the base,
that it's at a different base.
But he follows up with something that I thought was fairly interesting and may have some connection to that. And he says that by that time, Attic had already concluded, quote, the reported phenomenon was real, unquote, and urged the creators of the task force to investigate. By September 23rd, 1947, Project Sign had established a study of the phenomenon. In his book, he states that Project Sign said they would have answers within less than a year, unquote. And he says, for what UFOs are, and emphasized that the question, do UFOs exist, was never raised.
Oh,
Yeah.
Perhaps that naive estimation for the amount of time it would take to get to the bottom of it was based on the fact that they may have had wreckage in their possession.
Yeah.
And maybe they did get to the bottom of some of it.
And like you said, it's probably more than one thing. So getting to the bottom of one particular incident or even a flap doesn't necessarily mean you've gotten to the bottom of the whole phenomena.
Well, I think things started to change a little bit shortly after that. On January 7th, another pivotal case happened. January 7th, 1948, the Louisville Courier newspaper carried the headline, F-51 and Captain Mantell destroyed chasing flying saucer. As many of you know, this was investigated by Project Sign. They claimed that he chased this balloon up to 20,000 feet.
Oh, that's the one over the lake?
No, it wasn't.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't over a lake. He crashed on land. But
all right.
They claimed that he was chasing a balloon and that he ascended to 20,000 feet until he passed out from lack of oxygen and crashed. But he stated that, quote, the object looks metallic and is of tremendous size. Regarding the incident, Ruppelt wrote, to the press, the nonchalant, offhanded manner at which Sign had written off the sighting showed great confidence in their conclusion. Venus. I'm sorry, they thought it was the planet Venus.
What?
Sign carried it as being the planet Venus.
Yeah, it's very large and metallic.
That's right.
But he says, behind the barbed wire fence that encircled Attic, the nonchalant attitude did not exist among the intelligence analysts. Interestingly, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who also later became a very famous UFO researcher, he was working for Project Blue Book, and he was really one of the early skeptics.
Yeah, he's this famous swamp gas guy.
Right, and let's see here.
What? So which one was it that was over the lake? Because there was a similar... Was it over a lake? The plane chased it up, way up high, and it was right at the Canadian border. And then they tried to say that it was a plane from Canada that was impinging on U.S. airspace. But
I don't remember that.
Okay,
that specific
but
case.
He chased it. They've never. I don't think they've ever. Well, maybe they did find the plane. I'm trying to remember if it crashed into the water and they lost it. But he did. It was the same thing. He chased it up and up and up and up and up, and then they assumed that he lost consciousness.
Well, J. Allen Hynek was the head of astronomy at Ohio State University, and he's the one that came up with the determination that it was the planet Venus. But in his book, Ruppelt states, he said that the, quote, weasel-worded report carried that said that it was planet Venus was later, J. Allen Hynek admitted to him that even on a clear day, that Venus would have been very difficult, if not impossible, to see. And it was not a clear day when it occurred.
Right. Yeah, that's the other thing about it being Venus is it was during the day at like 3 p.m, right?
That's got to be insulting. I mean, you're a pilot and you're accused of chasing another planet.
Yeah, a planet. Yeah.
He says that Attic's investigation searched for skyhook balloons, sundogs, and even reflection on his canopy. However, Ruppelt states, everybody at Attic was convinced that the object Mantell was after was a spaceship and that this was the only course that would be pursued. So what they were saying publicly was completely different than what they were saying internally.
Yeah. Why would they do that? I guess it was still a secret at the time. And ATIC, I know you told us, but what does it stand for again? ATIC? It's the aviation, what is it?
Let me see here.
That's fine.
Look at
Air Tactical Intelligence Center.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So...
yeah, the Watcher's given us specifications of the Mustang, IP-51 Mustang specifications. Max ceiling is 41,900 feet. So he must have chased it pretty high.
Yeah, I think they claim he chased it to 20,000 feet when the plane crashed or came back down. By July of 1948, Sign had conducted an investigation of the reported maneuvers of the unknown objects, and came back with what they called the estimate of the situation, and it concluded that the objects were, quote, intelligently controlled, unquote, and likely, quote, interplanetary in origin, unquote.
Yeah.
That report was forwarded to the Pentagon, and General Hoyt Vandenberg rejected the conclusion. Representatives from ATIC were sent to the Pentagon to make their case, and Vandenberg could not be convinced. So the report was destroyed, although Ruppelt states that there were a few copies that were maintained.
That's the other weird thing, is I know that they would destroy a lot of their data. You know, there would be these purges.
You know, and the other thing, I guess, that's important to consider is that this was not going on just here in the United States. There were, in Europe at that same time, they were having what they called ghost rocket sightings.
Yes, the ghost rockets.
And then the fireball sightings.
Yeah.
The fireball sightings were started happening here in the United States as well. They were seeing these bright green fireballs.
Yeah.
There was another project headed by Dr. Lincoln La Paz that was called Project Twinkle. And they conducted investigations of sightings. There were quite a few of them in New Mexico. They were seen all over the United States. He concluded that they were not meteoric in origin because their trajectory was too flat, they were too green, and despite extensive attempts, no fragments could be found. I will say this. In recent years, there have been discussions about aircraft that used what they call zip fuel, and this is a boron-based fuel. In fact, the SR-71 and A-12 spy planes, the Blackbird, used a small amount of, from my understanding, used a small amount of this boron fuel to ignite the engines. And this boron burns green.
So that's why when the engines come on, it's green and then it turns blue.
Yeah, and
that's cool.
And in recent years, there have been persistent reports of something that's been flying over the skies here in the United States that they refer to as the Green Lady. That's supposed to be some form of high-speed reconnaissance aircraft. And it allegedly uses some type of boron fuel.
Wow.
So it's conceivable that those fireball sightings may not have had anything to do with the other sightings that were going on, and that they may have been tests of, maybe they were just doing tests of the boron fuel.
Yeah. The ghost rockets, too, are strange. I think Micah Hanks wrote a book about the ghost rocket sightings. And he points out that even though they sound like, when you look at them briefly, that you think, all right, they're rockets flying over. But once you dig down into the reports, they have the same weird high strangeness as a lot of these UFO things, even though they act like rockets. They're basically cigar shaped with flames at the back. But some of them like land in water and then come back out and down into people's lake. Okay, so the Watcher says the incident I was talking about is the Kinross incident over Lake Superior. That's the one I was thinking of, where he basically does the same thing. He gets in a plane, he chases something to some ridiculously high altitude, and then he falls back into the lake. And they claim it was a Canadian aircraft that flew accidentally across the border. But of course, the Canadians are like, no, we didn't do that. It was a UFO incident, though.
Well, shortly after the Mantell incident, Project Sign was changed to Project Grudge.
Yeah.
And Ruppelt discusses that a little bit in his book, and he says this drastic change in attitude was as difficult to explain many people within sign to the many people within sign. Although intelligence circles people had chosen sides, the two UFO factions that exist today were born. So he's suggesting that there were factions within the Air Force that were convinced that these things were of concern and were possibly interplanetary aircraft.
Yeah.
Or craft, and another faction that either didn't buy it or didn't want it investigated.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's not Nick Pope. Nick Redfern. Are you familiar with that guy in any of his research? Nick Redfern. He's done a lot. Well, he's done a lot of UFO stuff, and he talked about there was a group of people in the government that was also seemed to be concerned that these things were demonic, basically.
Yeah, I've heard references to that.
Yeah.
In fact, Ruppelt does expand on this. He says this change in operating policy was so pronounced that, like so many other people, I wondered if there was a hidden reason for the change. Was it an effort to cover up the fact that the UFOs had been proven to be interplanetary and that it should be withheld from the public at all costs to prevent mass panic?
Yeah.
So even Ruppelt was unsure of what was going on.
Yeah.
I just can't buy that, the mass panic thing. I mean, I don't know what it's like to be a government official deciding what the public should know or not, so I can't really speak from authority on this, but it just seems like such a petty reason for secrecy. Like mass panic.
Yeah.
Like, well, how long would the mass panic last? I mean, it's not going to be like, even if it actually does take place, what are you going to do? I mean, what are they afraid that is going to happen?
So up until that point, up until January of 1949, the Air Force had been fairly open about discussing the topic. Then all of a sudden, something changed, and Ruppelt says, to one who is ultimately familiar with UFO history, it is clear that Project Grudge had a two-phase program of UFO annihilation. The first phase consisted of explaining every UFO report, and the second phase was to tell the public how the Air Force had solved all of the sightings.
Yeah.
This Project Grudge reasoned would put an end to the UFO reports. However, he says that the reason that the project name was changed was because that the Project Sign's name had been compromised. And he said, this was all, and this is a quote from Ruppelt, this was always my official answer to any question about the name change. I'd go further and say that the name change from Sign to Grudge had no significance. This wasn't true. They did have significance, a lot of it. He went on to refer to Project Grudge as the dark age of intellectual stagnation on the subject of UFOs.
Yeah. It's weird to me that they called it Grudge. Grudge against what?
Well, here's something that's really interesting about this phase. Soon after Grudge was started, or the name was changed to Grudge, they approached Sidney Shallett, a writer for the Saturday Evening Post, claiming that he had the, quote, prerequisites that were desired. And the Air Force Public Relations Officer, Harry Habner, was assigned to coach Shallett on exactly what to say. He wrote a two-part article that appeared in the April 30th and May 7th issues of the Saturday Evening Post. And about those articles, Ruppelt states, it's important in UFO history to understand that because this had considerable effect on public opinion. Shallett's article casually admitted that a few UFO sightings couldn't be explained, but the reader didn't have much of a chance to think about that fact because 99% of the article was devoted to the anti-saucer side of of the problem.
Yeah.
The article started out by psychologically conditioning the reader by using phrases like the great flying saucer scare, rich full-blown screwiness, and fearful freaks, and so forth. So by the time the reader gets to the meat of the article, he feels like a rich full-blown jerk for even be thinking about UFOs.
Yeah.
So clearly there was now a strategy of discrediting witnesses and diminishing the importance of sightings, the validity of sightings.
Yeah, and making people feel like if they had thought they had seen something that they might be crazy, or making people who hadn't seen anything think that anybody who claimed to have seen something was either crazy or looking for attention, all the classic stuff. And also, wasn't there something about, I don't know if this was during Sign or Grudge or Blue Book, but there was something about how they were concerned that some enemy of the United States may use UFO sightings to crowd communication lines.
That came later.
Okay.
That was the Robertson panel.
Okay, that's right, Robertson.
Yeah, that was a CIA panel.
Yeah.
Some pretty interesting backstory to that as well that's not very well known.
Okay, cool.
But in response, this is where things get really interesting in terms of those two facets of even the intelligence community. How the factions were, I think they were kind of undertaking sort of a media war.
Yeah.
In January of 1950, True magazine contained a lengthy article written by Donald Keyhoe, titled "The Flying Saucers Are Real," and in the article, Ruppelt states he took each sighting, detailed the facts, ripped the Air Force's official conclusions to shreds. He presented his own analysis, and this, combined with the fact that True had a name for printing the truth, hit the reading public like an 8-inch howitzer. Hours after it appeared in subscribers' mailboxes and on newsstands, radio and TV commentators and newspapers were giving it big play. UFOs were back in business to stay, and it's rumored among magazine publishers that Keyhoe's article in True was one of the most widely read magazine articles in history.
Wow.
What's really important about that is that article introduced the concept of a government conspiracy. Before that, the public generally had a lot of trust in the government, and the idea that the government might be lying to them or withholding information just didn't seem palatable to the public.
Yeah.
But Keyhoe presented a lot of information that was convincing, and I think it illustrates the beginning of the back and forth between the two factions.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember when we played the soundbite from in the Antarctica episode, right? We played the soundbite from Major John Sanford, and at the end of that, they also had a couple of comments from Keyhoe, and he wrote the book called "Flying Saucers Are Real."
Yes.
Yeah. Yep, and I thought that Sanford gave a pretty good, that he was saying, hey, we have reports of incredible things from credible people, but Keyhoe wasn't satisfied with that. You can tell by the way he's talking. He's like, well, despite what the Air Force is saying here, there have been lots of sightings by lots of credible people, and some of them by their own pilots, of these things burning past them at very high speeds. So yeah, there was a war going on there. And when we talked to Bosley, he said the same thing. He said that very interesting thing to us. He was like, listen, when you get in the intelligence community and you get kind of high up in there, you find out that everyone is interested in this stuff. They're all interested in it.
Yeah.
Well, as a result of that article, Project Grudge released a report that covered 237 investigations. They did this to try to, cool off interest and try to, portray that they had found solutions for all the cases.
Right, yeah.
Well, when people started digging into information that the Grudge report contained, it had numbers like 32% were attributed to astronomical, sources, 12% were balloons, and 33% were categorized as either hoax, misidentified aircraft, or too nebulous to evaluate. However, that left 23% as unexplainable.
Shh. Don't tell him that. Leave that number out.
I knew 33 was going to be in there, dude.
33 did show up. Yep. Where's my bell?
I know.
One of the reports, one from November 18th, 1948, that was one of the unexplained ones. An Air Force pilot over Andrews Air Force Base observed an object. He approached it, and he turned on his landing lights to illuminate the object. And he described it on the radio as a dark gray oval-shaped object smaller than his T6. He says, I couldn't tell if it was the lights or if the object was glowing.
Wow. Yeah, they've been seeing these things for forever. And don't they show up over bases and shut things off and stuff? Aren't there reports of that too?
Yeah, there have been several reports. I actually have some of that in my notes.
That's later on.
Yeah. I do a lot of interviews for different topics, but this is the first time I've ever done any public speaking whatsoever on this topic. So if I sound like I'm tongue-tied, it's because I've got like a million thoughts in my head that I'm trying to somehow relay through my mouth.
Yeah.
It's not the easiest thing to do.
Zero mistakes.
Flawless the first time. Yeah, if you have a million thoughts, maybe we need to do 100 podcasts. Sounds like we need a lot of podcasts to get through all those thoughts. So, when did they change it to Blue Book, and what was the reason for that change?
Well, this is where things start getting pretty interesting also. In March of 1950, True Magazine did another article called How Scientists Tracked Flying Saucers. And this one was written by Commander R.B. McLaughlin, who was none other than the individual in charge of the Navy scientists working at White Sands Proving Ground.
Oh.
So he would be much more difficult to discredit.
Yeah. And it's the Navy now.
Right. And in the article, McLaughlin states, I am convinced that it was a flying saucer, and further that the discs are spaceships from another planet operated by animate intelligent beings.
You need to do that in your 1950s announcer voice, though. I am convinced that these flying saucers are inhabited by beings from other planets.
So, the next year, Grudge started attempting to downplay further the sightings as hoaxes, hallucinations, misidentifications, etc. And then a wire came from the Pentagon over to Grudge's office, and it said, let's see here. Mr. Bob Gina of Life magazine is leaving for Daytona. He wants to check some of the reports. Ruppelt said at the headquarters of Grudge, hysteria ensued.
Oh, yeah.
Upon Gina's arrival, the seasoned reporter grilled the Grudge officers which left them scrambling to save face. Gina was not easily drawn off the scent and came away unimpressed with the organizational skills of the individuals involved. In anticipation of what was surely going to happen, on September 12th, 1951, Ruppelt was offered the leadership role. So basically the people in charge bailed and dropped it on Ruppert's lap.
Okay. Yeah, so they had a real reporter show up who asked a bunch of hard questions, and then they had to change tack. Disband that whole group and start a new one.
So Bob Gina's report article, which you read in episode
159.
159.
Yeah.
Right. That was the Life article.
It was right around 20 minutes in episode 159 if anybody wants to go back and hear it.
What's interesting about what Ruppelt says about that is really strange. He says the most important thing about the Life article was the question in everybody's minds. Why was it written? Life doesn't go off blasting off on flights of space fancy without good reason. Did the Air Force prompt Life to write the article? Was the question that many people were asking themselves. In answer to that question about the article being Air Force inspired, my weasel-worded answer was that we had furnished Life with some raw data on specific sightings. My answer was purposely weasel-worded because I knew the Air Force had unofficially inspired the Life article. The maybe they're interplanetary with the maybe bordering on they are was the personal opinion of several very highly ranked officers in the Pentagon. So high that their personal opinion was almost policy.
Wow. Man.
So here you have a very highly publicized article stating that UFOs are not only real, but they're interplanetary.
Yeah.
And the article was inspired by a general at the Pentagon.
Yeah. Who thought that, and because he thought that, it made it practically policy in the wow.
So interplanetary. So they're thinking like
They just mean basically not from here. That's how I take that. Because in the beginning they thought before we had a serious space program, they could have been from Venus or Mars or something. But
okay.
As we got better at looking at other planets in the solar system, it became clear that they're probably not from our solar system.
Okay.
But even in the contactee period, some of them seem to claim to be from planets in our solar system, and it wasn't until later on that they started claiming to be from farther off, right?
Well,
in the contactee period, they'll be like, "Oh yes, we're from Venus," or
like they're just telling you whatever.
Yeah.
Well, there's the whole Pleiades connection, that the UFO connection or the abduction connection of that came from, Betty and Barney Hill's.
Right, but that's much later, isn't it?
Right, but it was interesting in that the way that came about is Betty drew a star map that she was shown on the ship.
Yeah.
And they had no idea what that star map was. And then there was a researcher, think of her name, Marjorie.
Watch her.
Yeah.
Yeah, watch
her.
She, trying to figure out what this map was, actually created a star map in her home. She placed a bunch of deals, and she would lie on the floor and take different angles looking at all these stars, trying to figure, or these, dots that would simulate the stars, to try to figure out what it was that Betty had seen.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that it matched the Pleiades.
Yeah, the Pleiades. Yeah. And I've seen other people talk about that, like that the star map must have been specifically made to show her, because you can't actually use a two-dimensional star map to fly around in three-dimensional space.
Yeah.
Right?
That goes back to that
deception, yeah. Or that they've planned this encounter, and they're like, yes, we're going to show her this,
Okay.
However, their connections to the Pleiades going back to ancient Egypt.
I completely agree with that. Yeah, I completely agree with that. But I just remember people pointing out, like, a little, like an actual piece of paper or a map with stars on it doesn't help you fly around in space.
Is this Martin Molnar Gob?
Wayne Herschel?
No. It was a female. I think her name is Majori Fish, maybe? Something along those lines.
I do remember the story.
I have the worst memory for names.
Yeah, me too. But it just, like,
it's
basically
cool,
what you were... Yeah, don't worry about it, Martin.
That's what the...
Whatever your name is.
Okay, Ross.
Yeah. Ross and Keith and Martin in the cube.
What you're suggesting is that part of the deception aspect of it is that during the period of time when we didn't really know a whole lot about the planets, that they could say, yeah, we're from this local planet.
Yeah.
And then after we got more and more data about the planets, then
They started claiming to be from
they
farther
start
out.
claiming to be. And that really suggests, projection on the part of the
It does, yeah.
people who are witnessing this.
Or a co-creation of some
Co-creation. You could take it that way, right? I mean, a scriptard extraordinaire like myself could basically say, yeah, so it's less credible, if you're trying to say something about
the people who were making up the accounts back then were making up that they were from Venus because maybe people could be from Venus, and then later they're like, no, now they're making it up that they're from Sirius or whatever.
Yeah, because it's just pushing the mystery further away.
Yeah.
Russ and I have had this conversation before. Yeah, I was right. We're pretty close, huh? Majority fish.
Yeah, there you go.
Huh. Thank you.
Zeta
Marjorie Fish.
By the way, his microphone is slowly sinking.
Oh.
You ought to fix that. I've noticed that it's been drifting down very slowly this whole time.
All right.
There you go.
I'm trying to keep it kind of low. He's got to read a lot.
Yeah.
Well, so we've had this conversation, and I don't know. I kind of tend to lean towards the fact that the experiencers are fed information that is in line with whatever they're predisposed to believing.
Yeah.
That it's not necessarily factual. It's just they just feed off whatever inclinations that person might already have.
Yeah, so you could say that it's a effective method of communication between beings who are from vastly different
Experiences or something.
Yeah, so if you're trying to go communicate with, let's say there's some, butt flap tribe somewhere that has no idea about any technology, they have spears and butt flaps, and you're trying to communicate with them, you would try to do it in a way that was where they would recognize analogies, or you know what I'm saying?
Well, it just occurred to me that some of this could be interpretation. I mean, remember, odds are these communications are not taking place in English or whatever the native native language of this individual is. It's thoughts are being, I believe they say the thoughts are being projected into their minds, right?
Yeah.
So maybe this translator is using words that, we may be misinterpreting the words, it's just like...
so they're coming over here and they're using translate.
Right, exactly. You're using Google Translate and it's putting everything backwards and you're taking it word for word as gospel, and so that could be part of it, but there are instances where things that I find highly questionable. For example, a lot of these early contactees or abductees back, during the Cold War, let's say in the 60s or so, they were talking that these beings were concerned about nuclear war and that we were going to destroy the planet,
Yeah.
And then more recently, those concerns have turned to environmental concerns, that we're destroying the planet because we're, and who's to say that these projections, that they're not, let's just for the sake of argument, let's say they're shown a planet in shambles, right?
Yeah.
And the observer is trying to interpret these images that are being projected into their mind, and they make the connection that they must mean it's global warming, or something along those lines, when it may be a warning of some
Future
cataclysm, something
comet,
completely. And so it's not that they're trying to deceive the individual, it's that the individual is misinterpreting the information that's being relayed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is pure speculation. We have no idea, but it's a possibility.
Yeah.
So you can look at the cargo cults, if where these people think, well, if we build landing strips, that they'll come back, right?
Yeah.
So you can imagine that throughout the time that, say, the Air Force was there communicating with these people, they're trying to figure out, well, how do you come down from the sky? And well, you got to have these landing strips, And so they think that that's what brings them. And it's, you know what I'm saying? It's, it just gets lost in translation, basically.
Yeah. I saw a picture of one of the cargo cult planes.
Yeah.
The other day. It's all made out of grass and sticks,
you know? That's pretty cool.
It's really awesome. Yeah, all right, we got to take another break.
Oh, yeah, that's
fastest 2 hours in podcast. It's going by quick, yeah. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, for the second half of the show, third segment. We are fully displaying our certificates of ignorance in here on this very wide-ranging and detailed topic of UFO sightings throughout history and our interactions with them and the government and public and media response to the reports. And we're joined by Marty, who is Overkill in the Discord. And he's given us some great data. So where were we at? I lost track of where we were at. We had a long break there.
Well, you made reference to General Stanford's press conference, and the one most people probably are familiar with that. It was pretty highly publicized, where he stated that they've been able to explain sightings as hoaxes, erroneously identified friendly aircraft, meteorological or electronic phenomena, or light aberrations. He did, however, concede that there have been a remaining percentage of this total, about 20%, of reports that come from credible observers of relatively incredible things.
Yeah.
That statement was soon put into scrutiny, or under scrutiny. The Air Force, shortly after that, hired a very prestigious organization called the Battelle Memorial Institute out of Columbus, Ohio. They were hired to do a top-secret independent statistical analysis of 2,199 cases that had been collected by the Air Force between June 1st, 1947 and December 31st, 1952. This was called Project Stork. Battelle had a panel of scientists, and they took these reports. The first thing they did is they separated them by the quality, what they considered the quality of the report. They divided them as excellent, good, doubtful, and poor. They then categorized what they determined were the likely explanations for these. But the way they did it is they created individual panels. One panel would create an evaluation of the report, and then there was an identification panel that was separate that would determine what they felt that was. If those things agreed, then the sighting would be placed under that category. And they had categories like balloons, astronomical, aircraft, light phenomena, birds, clouds, psychological, unknown, and other. They also had a category specifically called insufficient information. If a sighting was determined to be unknown, or if the panels did not agree on the explanation for a specific sighting, those sightings went before the entire all the members, and there had to be unanimous agreement as to what that explanation was.
Yeah.
So the 33% that fell under unexplained were not the cases for which there was insufficient information.
Or the poor reports.
Right. These were the best sightings. And those sightings that fell under that were the ones that were made at close range by high-quality observers that were qualified. So it was the cream of the crop.
Yeah.
What was the percentage?
Actually, if you extract out the ones that were not of the highest caliber, you could you can bring the percentage down to 23%. It depends on how you look at the statistics.
Okay. Yeah.
You know how statistics
Play games with statistics.
Right. You can make
What was
numbers
published.
look like whatever. Right. But bottom line, the cases that were listed as unknowns that were high quality reports, it was 23% of the reports. So interestingly, of that, contrary to General Stanford's statement that most cases could be explained as hoaxes or psychological, well, Battelle found that only 2% of the cases could be attributed to either psychological or hoaxes. So
Stanford was going on. He was basing his on the Air Force people rather than this particular. That's what you're saying. This happened after that.
No, yes, this was after Stanford's statement.
Okay, yeah.
So it contradicted, Stanford's statement.
Right, but his statement must have been based on. It wasn't Blue Book yet. It was something else, right?
It was still Grudge.
Still
at that
Grudge,
point,
yeah.
right.
So, but even Grudge was having to say that 20% of the cases were unexplained.
Grudge, right? Grudge's report was, I think, their percentage of unexplained were slightly higher, but Battelle was, well, first of all, but the Project Stork was top secret. But the quality of the researchers, these were legitimate scientists and everything. They weren't necessarily all Air Force personnel.
Yeah.
But
a bunch of grunts in there.
Right. But the interesting part about this information was put out in Special Report number 14, which I have a copy of it sitting here. There's a lot of really valuable information that can be gleaned out of this thing. Out of these unknowns, there were 271 daylight discs, 29 radar visual sightings, 10 radar sightings, 46 close encounters of the first kind, 33 of the second kind, and 8 of the third kind.
Whoa.
So that begs the question, what is the threshold for concern? In other words, is 8 people that claim they, 8 high quality incidents of people claiming an encounter with beings, not lights in the sky, with beings.
That's right.
That this panel still said they could not come up with an explanation.
Yeah. So first kind is lights in the sky, right?
Right.
Second kind is a visible craft and maybe
physical trace.
Yeah. And then third kind is interaction with beings.
Up close
Yeah.
interaction, correct.
And fourth kind is like they take you to space or something like that, right? Isn't there a fourth kind? I'm serious.
You don't want to know about the sixth. All right. So while Battelle was conducting their investigation, the CIA got involved as well, and they organized their own study. It was called a Robertson Panel. They hired physicist Howard P. Robertson to head this panel, and it was made up of several scientists. They met for a total of 12 hours of investigation over 3 days. They investigated 2,331 cases in 3 days. So suffice to say, it was a whitewash.
Yeah.
And their conclusions was that national security agencies should take immediate steps to strip the unidentified flying objects of their special status, of the special status they've been given, and the aura of mystery that they have unfortunately acquired. They're the ones that recommended that UFO organizations be infiltrated and UFO sightings should be discredited, and also that was going on at the same time that Project Stork was doing their top secret study. And there's a very interesting connection between those that we'll touch on in just a minute.
I mean, that could also be a plot to make the investigations go deeper into secrecy rather than actually, you know what I'm saying? This idea that they're going to, okay, let's discredit all of this stuff and this is not important. We're going to downgrade the status of all of this as a, like, you can imagine like the CIA doing this to something that they want to go further into the top secret.
Yeah.
Well, also keep in mind that this Robertson panel convened shortly after the Washington D.C. flap, which
the flap,
created quite a bit of concern with the public. So, it's understandable that they were trying to douse the flames of fear that might have inspired. So, I can understand. It seems to me that Bethel was conducting a real study while the Robertson panel was not. They had two completely different objectives.
Yeah. Were they both secret, or was it just the...
No, I don't believe the Robertson panel was secret.
Okay, so that was the one for public consumption, whereas the real study was going on in secret.
Right.
And it was the Robertson one that the Watcher is saying that's the one that suggested that it might overwhelm military communications?
Correct. They were saying that a foreign agency or foreign nations could use the UFO phenomenon to, cause mass panic or overwhelm the communication systems.
Right.
Yeah. Later, by the late 1960s, another panel was convened. It was called the Condon Committee. And it was, for the most part, done to give the Air Force an excuse to shut down Project Blue Book.
Right.
We now know that, since 2017, information was brought out by the New York Times that there were other studies being done in secret, ATIP and all. But bottom line, we had from the establishment of Project Sign in 1948 through 1969 with Blue Book, you had them go through all these, different panels and all to do investigation of these sightings. But all of that may not have accounted for much because of something that was uncovered later. It was called, they refer to it as the Bollinger Memo. This was a document that was a secret document. It's dated December 20th, 1969, signed by Brigadier General Carl Bollinger. He was the Deputy Director of Development for the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And I'm going to quote just a segment of this, and it says, as early as 1953, the Robertson Panel concluded that the evidence presented on unidentified flying objects showed no indications that the phenomenon constituted a direct physical threat to national security. It was interesting that they used the word physical threat. There still, however, is no evidence that Project Blue Book reports have served any intelligence function. Moreover, reports of unidentified flying objects which could affect national security are made in accordance with JANAP 146 or Air Force Manual 55-11 and are not part of the Blue Book system.
What does that mean?
In other words, the best reports, the ones that could be construed as having national security importance, were never forwarded
to Blue Book. Oh my God!
So, in spite of the fact that 23% of the reports that were forwarded were found to be unexplainable, the best sightings they never saw.
Oh God, man!
It sounds like you just have multiple different objectives in bureaucracies. I mean, this sounds very familiar to me.
Yeah.
Like one objective is, hey, let's catalog all of these things, right, that are happening and study them. Another objective is, hey, let's look for things that are a threat to national security. And then within that, they say, well, some of these need to be top secret and some of them we can release to the public because there's more than one objective even in looking at things that are a threat to national security.
Yeah.
So you have this type of thing happen within bureaucracies because there's basically never any single person who understands all of the things, the full scope of what's going on within the bureaucracy itself, right? Every person is allocated a specific task, and then reports like have to move up this ladder, and then they're given certain classifications. And so across bureaucracies, you see this tendency to not share information due to protocols that are built in to the specific bureaucracy for reasons completely unrelated to the desires of the other bureaucracy that's trying to do this. You see what I'm saying?
We saw that after 9/11, that we found that one of the big failings is that there were no,
they weren't talking to each other. Yeah.
Interagency communications. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing.
Exactly.
They're both kind of studying the same thing, but they're taking different approaches.
And if you like, for me, I'm trying to put myself in the mind of somebody that's high up in the military, that's looking at the possibility of threats, what that could mean in terms of national security, and they're not thinking about whatever the heck this other project Blue Book is, but they get this thing and they're like, okay, slap this. This remains within, you know what I'm saying? So it ends up inadvertently, and I could say maybe there was a conspiracy involved, but it seems to me plausible that this could be an inadvertent cause for the reason why the most important ones were withheld from this other system that's trying to catalog everything and find out.
Yeah, there can be, all it takes is for the details of the case to involve top secret stuff.
Yeah.
Like something affects some base with top secret equipment in it. You can't release that information to a public committee.
Right. You have this compartmentalized information.
Yes.
And this we're going to get into a different aspect of this that I think might somewhat explain this in a sense, in that it is quite possible that due to that compartmentalization, there were certain individuals within the Pentagon who were more in the know about the real details, and others that were being fed the information they wanted to hear, probably. Yeah. And they have been completely unaware of the facts, the real facts.
Right.
So we discussed how the Bethel Memorial Institute was contracted to do their study, Project Stork.
Yeah.
Well, in 1992, a former employee of Bethel that also worked for the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, Dr. Irena Scott, confessed. Actually, she relayed a confession to MUFON from an individual named Elroy Center, a senior research chemist in material science for Bethel from 1939 to 1957. Center passed away in 1991, but in June of 1960, he confided that while working at Bethel, he provided technical assistance and evaluation for unknown materials that he was told were retrieved from crashed flying saucers.
Whoa. He
added that the debris was highly unusual and featured hieroglyphic-like markings.
Oh, man.
Center's family confirmed that he had a lifelong interest in UFOs, including while working at Bethel. That's all fine and dandy. It's just another anecdotal story. We've heard dozens upon dozens, hundreds, thousands. Right. But, okay. In an interview in 1990, General Arthur Exon, who was in 1947 lieutenant colonel at Wright Field, which is Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, he made statements regarding material allegedly recovered at the UFO crash in Roswell. He stated that, quote, "It was a shape of some kind. You could grab an end and bend it, and it would come right back.
Oh, yeah.
It was flexible to a degree. I think it had full range testing. Everything from chemical analysis, stress tests, compression tests, flexing. It was brought into our material evaluation labs. I don't know how it arrived, but the boys who tested it said it was very unusual. I don't know at the time if it was titanium or some other metal, or if it was something they knew about, but the processing was something different. So this is yet another anecdotal story. This is somebody credible that would have been in a position to have known of such things, but again, nothing to support his statement, other than it matched descriptions given by other Roswell witnesses.
I remember I remember the description of it being
here's
like a memory material.
Right. So here's where it gets interesting. 19 years later, in August of 2009, a journalist named Billy Cox obtained through the Freedom of Information Act information that in the months following the crash at Roswell, Bethel Memorial Institute conducted, quote, research and development on titanium alloys for the Air Force. This was completely unknown. This was prior to Project Stork. So they did this study on titanium alloys, but not just any titanium alloys, specifically nickel titanium shape memory metals. And who was the co-author of that report obtained under the Freedom of Information Act? At Elroy Center, the individual who claimed to have worked at Bethel on crashed UFO. Furthermore, General Exxon claimed that the material had undergone chemical analysis. Center was a chemical analyst.
That's right. Yep.
And his section of the Bethel report, titled Analytical Methods for Titanium-Based Alloys, detailed chemical analysis to detect the quality impurities of material used for shape metal applications. For this project, Center worked under head metallurgist Dr. Howard Cross, who was in charge of the shape metal program. In his book Forbidden Science, Jack Vallée revealed that while researching Allen Hynek's Blue Book files, he discovered a top-secret document titled that he refers to as the Pentacle Memo. I'm sorry, here we go. Yeah. Stumbling over my words.
It's all right. The Pentacle Memo.
Right, Pentacle. Not Pinnacle, Pentacle. Okay. It was dated January 9th, 1953. It was sent from Bethel to Colonel Miles Gall at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Colonel Gall was chief of analysis for T2, which was provided technical intelligence of recovered enemy aircraft technologies. Vallée placed great emphasis on the memorandum's significance, stating, quote, this recommendation is based, the letter states, this recommendation is based on our experience to date in analyzing several thousands of reports on the subject of UFOs. Our representatives strongly recommend that a scientific panel not be set up until the results of our analysis of the sighting reports collected by ATIC are available. Since the meeting of the panel is now definitely scheduled, we feel that agreement between Project Stork and ATIC should be reached as to what can and what cannot be discussed at the meeting in Washington. So what's going on there is Bethel, operating on a secret program, is communicating with the Air Force and telling them that they do not think that the CIA should be allowed to conduct their own investigation. And since they can't stop it, they want to make sure that the Air Force does not relay certain information to the panel.
Wow.
What do you think the significance of that is? I mean,
well, first of all, they're saying Bethel is saying that they've already studied thousands of reports.
Yeah.
And Vallée goes on to say, he's quoting here, the Storm team reacted with fury when Hynek went back to Bethel in 1967, demanding to know the truth. The man I have called Pentacle snatched the notes away from him and told him in no uncertain terms that the contents of the memo were not to be discussed under any circumstances. Yeah. So you have an individual, the author of the document, of the Pentacle Memo, that is telling the Air Force not to divulge certain information to the CIA. When Hynek found out about that and confronted him, the guy was infuriated and ripped the memo out of his hand. The author of that memo was Dr. Howard Cross.
What?
Elroy Center's boss.
Oh, God. Wow.
It proves not only was Bethel working on a secret project on shape metal memories, or shape memory metal, Howard Cross was in charge of Project Stork.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting coincidence right there.
So that's what we have thought, is that there are secret programs going on in the background that are looking at this stuff seriously, and for whatever reason, they are very protective of the data.
Right. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base sponsored technical studies of memory metal, and in 1949 on nickel titanium alloys. These were used to create an alloy called nitol, which is the premier memory metal on the planet. The fact that the 1949 report referenced shape metal alloys, let's see here.
So basically what we're talking about here is that that the idea of back engineering,
reverse engineering,
reverse engineering.
It's, I guess the point here is that it seems like an extreme coincidence that immediately following the alleged Roswell crash, a researcher working at Bethel claims that he was working on crash recovery material on shape metal or memory metal.
Yeah.
And his boss was in charge of the UFO study at Bethel.
Right. And the author of the Pentacle Memo.
Document. He was also responsible for Special Report number 14. It just seems like a lot of coincidences going on there.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, the ones that patented, the organization that patented the nitol, this shape memory metal, was the U.S. Navy. Who is now the one talking about being in possession
of crash materials. That's right.
So we've kind of gone full circle here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, like, this has never, I've not really looked into this topic. Russ has, come down from his tower and, yelled about it for many nights. But it's never been something that I've really tried to look into myself. And so trying to, obviously Russ is familiar with a lot of these names and stuff. So you're dropping all these names, and this is all new to me, so it's hard. I'm going to have to listen to this episode multiple times.
Well, this is, I guess you could say this has been sort of an esoteric conversation in terms of the finer details of the governmental handling of
we're still in the history,
sightings. Right. We haven't touched on the actual sightings themselves, really. Some of those might convince you a little more than this.
Well, I don't know. So I guess I'm coming out of left field here because I've heard a lot of the sightings.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I've seen documentaries about sightings, and we've talked a lot about different sightings and stuff. Those types of details, for me, the anecdotal stuff is interesting, but it's one of those things, a lot like the missing 411. I don't know what to do with it. I'm just kind of like,
let me throw.
Okay, that's cool, but the history of like these government agencies trying to deal with all of this stuff, and that honestly to me is more convincing. You know what I'm saying? That
it's the more tangible aspect of the phenomenon.
It is, yeah, exactly. It's like,
if you end up with some awesome memory metal, it's tangible.
Well, not only that, but the fact that the weird aspect of all of these top secret people or people that deal with top secret information, like struggling with the handling of all of the information and trying to block it and do all the, that kind of lends legitimacy to it.
Yeah.
Watcher has a good point there. Why would they go out of their way to hide something?
Yeah.
Exactly.
If there was nothing to it.
Yeah.
There was a lot of machinations going on.
Oh, man. See, that's classic conspiracy right there. The fact that they're hiding the information is proof that the information is real.
Well, that could be a psyop too.
Yeah, I'm
just giving you shit.
That's the other thing that on the surface of it, all of this recent stuff that's going on with the Freedom of Information Act things, and now it's like kind of all this stuff in the New York Times. Looking at it through the lens of the article that you sent that was the Life magazine, it's kind of like, okay, is this just
the next
cycle of psyop? Right.
Yeah.
Well,
so going into those details where you have, this stuff happened so long ago and nobody knew about it.
But it's layers of psyop. That's the thing is you have a report that could be construed as being somewhat damaging to the Air Force's position because it's really counter to what their official position was.
Yeah.
But then we come to find out it was inspired by the Air Force.
Yeah.
So that even makes it seem like a psyop because now they're sending out conflicting information.
Yeah. Or that seems like you were implying in the beginning that there's two factions on the UFO subject in the intelligence and military communities, period. And they've been fighting each other through the bureaucracies. There's the one side that's like they want to downplay it, they want to dismiss it, they want the public to think it's bullcrap. And then there's the other side that's like, no, there's something serious here and we really need to study it. And these two have been fighting a media battle and a bureaucracy battle this whole time. And that's what we're seeing in these conflicting reports and studies and groups and panels. And
legitimately, the faction that was anti-saucer, phenomenon might not have been privy to the information. They might have been being kept in the dark. It would seem this is now I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat.
All right. Finally getting down to business here.
But it's possible, I guess, in all these different scenarios that could be, drawn from this. It would seem that it was the actual Air Force that inspired the thought that this might be something that's extraterrestrial in origin.
Yeah.
Maybe that was the psyop.
Right.
Maybe they've known that it was not extraterrestrial. That was the more palatable
the
excuse.
Extraterrestrial hypothesis is the more palatable answer
Right.
than what it really is.
In other words, take for example, unlikely scenarios like Bob Lazar.
Yeah.
The big thing with Bob Lazar, he had a lot of really valid information.
Yeah.
And,
But he was friends
over
with-
time, a lot of the outlandish things he was saying have more or less proven to be true.
Yeah.
Not everything, but
Right.
a certain degree of it. And, of course, all good disinformation contains a certain percentage of
Yes.
legitimate information,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
But the fact that he was friends with known, researchers
Like
of
Lear.
UFOs, right? Yeah, and then it being introduced to George Knapp and all, it seems like an unlikely scenario, right? And
you mean the scenario of them hiring him, knowing he had those associations?
Correct. I mean,
Okay,
they had to do background checks, right?
Yeah. You're right. That it seems like they picked him.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's then shown this stuff and told that
It's
it's aliens, right?
Yeah.
Again, that sort of, doesn't it seem like maybe he was being led in the wrong direction on
Yeah.
purpose?
Right.
Or
Yeah.
it's conceivable that he's being fed this information.
That he's telling the truth of
right.
what he knows.
He's just relaying what he was told.
Right.
That doesn't mean it was true.
Right.
He was just part of the deception.
He's not lying, but somebody did.
Right. If
Yes.
you're part of the psyop, it's very unlikely you're going to recognize that you're the mouse in the maze.
That's right. Yeah.
And why? So why would they do this to So if I'm thinking of the again, there's like a conflict between the people in government that would be considering national security and the ones that are just purely interested in what's going on. Again, there's like a conflict there. So it's like if certain people think we want our enemies to think that this is, that we're not developing this tech or this tech, whatever it is, they may take somebody like Bob Lazar and try to say that it's alien tech, or they're trying to hype it for enemies to think that we have found something out of this world as opposed to, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to come up with some.
That's one possible scenario. Another scenario could be that's more the excuse, but not, or it's not necessarily. I guess let me put it this way: they may not have been lying when they say that they do not pose a direct physical threat. Underline the word physical.
Because there's like...
the threat isn't physical. There's a threat. It's just not physical.
Yeah.
Now, that's a paradoxical statement because, we had a lot of conversation before this.
Yeah.
And one of the issues that came up is, and I sound like I'm contradicting myself constantly, but it's because it's that complicated. There's no simple answer. This would have been figured out a long time ago. But let's, for a moment, speculate on the fact that this is not something physical, right? That this is something interdimensional, time traveler. It's not a physical threat, right? It's not the entities or the craft or whatever it is they don't represent something physical.
They're not going to show up and blow us up.
However, the fact that there's evidence that there may have been crash wreckage and the radar data and all these other things suggest technology, physical technology.
Yeah.
So then that would mean that these other entities, whether they're interdimensional or time travelers or whatever, have to use technology to access our realm.
Yep.
Which, how does a non-physical, I don't know, how does a non-physical being create a physical technology?
Yeah.
In order, right? In order, it's a very complicated scenario to think of. Yeah, then again, I'm going to go back to the deception thing, that maybe these high strangeness cases might be part of the deception. I mentioned certain things that the Air Force threw out. There were cases that they considered too weird to even include in their reports. And one in particular that pops to mind was an incident where there was two brothers in a home. They were listening to the radio, and this was in the 50s. They hear or they feel this vibration. They hear this loud buzzing sound, and all of a sudden the radio goes to static, and they see bright lights coming through the window. They run out to their porch, and there's this craft flying very low over the house, and it makes 3 or 4 passes at low altitude over the home. And they would see the object coming, it would pass over the home, and as soon as it got past them, it would disappear and the sound would go away. They could only hear it when they could see it. And it did this like 4 times. The Air Force said that makes no sense. That's not possible. And they just tossed it.
Yeah.
So, there are aspects, craft appearing and disappearing. Those things are still happening now.
Yeah.
Some of that disappearing thing might be, they're not just appearing, it's just that they move so fast, they seem like they disappeared.
Yeah, and anything moving that fast through an atmosphere should make an enormous noise, and so they must have some way of moving that doesn't require them moving through the air and leaving a big hole, right? In the air.
There's no sonic booms.
Yeah.
No.
It's a big craft that just passed over your house that moved fast, so so fast away from your house that it disappeared should pull you and the entire house and trees up into the air after it, because it would leave this vacuum behind.
You know, that's one of the big, mysteries, related to the Hudson Valley sightings, like you were discussing in the last episode.
Yeah.
You hear about that, the massive, 200-300 foot, triangles hovering at low altitude over the, Tacoma Highway. And, over homes. They were very often seen over bodies of water, just hovering right over the water and all. But there are many reports where the objects would just literally be in front of them, and in a split second they'd be on the horizon, and then a split second later they'd be back. Whoa. So they were making these instantaneous jumps in the sky. There's many reports of that. There's another interesting aspect of that, because I know
we got to take a break. So we'll get into that afterwards. But yeah, I think it seems like a projection when you're talking about it in that way, like somebody from some other realm is trying to project something here, and sometimes the target's lost, and it's like,
Well, then you have,
that's a good one.
Other unexplainable things, like, a lot of the sightings of the disc-shaped objects, the observers will report that they seem unstable.
Yep.
They have the
like
falling
a
leaf,
yeah,
falling leaf, motion, and
Kenneth Arnold said it looked like they were skipping.
Right, they were skipping like saucers on the water.
Yeah.
What he saw were actually crescent shapes.
Crescent shapes, yeah.
But the media picked up on the
saucer part,
thing,
yeah.
But it's interesting that right after people started seeing saucers,
disc
right?
shapes,
so, again, it's this perception thing. Although triangular shaped UFOs go back at least to the 1800s, there are many, many sightings of the. So just because certain ones were being reported by the media didn't mean that, keep in mind back then, it's not like today that, somebody puts something on the wire and it's everywhere.
Right.
It's back then. A report
papers.
might have made a local paper.
Yeah.
200 or 300 people read it, and it was gone. And there are a lot of researchers that are scouring old newspapers for articles, and they're finding more and more constantly.
Yeah. Same thing with the disappearances. It's the same way. They get the really weird ones get reported locally, and they don't go anywhere after that.
And that's another thing that Hynek points out in his book regarding the Blue Book era. He says that very few of the high strangeness cases ever made it to Blue Book, because the frontline researchers or investigators, which would have been like the local police, would say, "Oh, we would never report that." Like they'd hear somebody with some outlandish story, right, and they would just forget it.
You're crazy.
This guy's, right,
You've been drinking too much. Go home. Yeah, walk it off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And as we discussed earlier, those high strangeness cases might be the key to all this. In other words, that unexplainable motion or actions that these people describe might be the missing pieces that we need to formulate some type of a cohesive picture,
Right. You need all the data. I totally agree.
Right.
I mean,
you can't exclude the things you don't agree
right,
with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, let's take a break. We'll come back for the final section. Everybody's lying to us.
I figured it out. Pyramids are cargo cult giant triangles. That's what it is.
Mystery solved.
X mystery. That's right, and we are back for the final segment of the final hour of the fastest 2.5 hours in podcasting.
Yep, going long, folks.
Going long. And yeah, I just want to say that from a guy who has never done deep dive into this subject, like the history of it has really piqued my interest in a way that I have never been. Like now I have that drive that I feel it's like, oh man, I need to dig. I need to start digging into this rabbit hole. Yeah. So that's really cool. I appreciate that.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah, great job, man.
For years, I come down here, obviously, and I've been telling him all the wrong stuff.
Yeah, I guess that is. I mean, that's, the anecdotal sort of case studies are not. I have the same problem with the 411 stuff.
Yeah,
it's interesting, but it doesn't really grab me in the way you've presented the information today. Even though it was like hard for me to follow the names of the different people and stuff. Like you'd look up with this like look on your face. It was like, this is incredibly significant. And I'm like, I don't remember that guy's name. But yeah, the between segment conversations we've been having, with you kind of us hashing it out and it's just giving me a better understanding. It's really cool. So I think one of the things in our conversations during the day when we were hanging out that you kept pushing was, this is not necessarily a nuts and bolts phenomenon. And so there is a consciousness aspect to it. There's a metaphysical aspect, as you said, possibly interdimensional. And one of the ways that I look at that type of situation is no matter what, if there's any type of apparition or appearance or light or something, as long as it's not completely coming from within a person's mind, there has to be an interaction in the physical world. So, and we were talking about this during the break, and I kind of think of like, if there is a non-physical realm, we would say non-physical because whatever their laws that govern their universe are not the same as ours. And so it looks like they don't have stuff and things to deal with. And, their technology may be a completely different type of thing because they don't have matter and they don't have all the same rules. But if they developed a type of technology that allowed them to cross into our universe, even if it's in combination with our consciousnesses and the, what did you call it? The co-creation type of thing.
Yeah.
That
there is a physical interaction.
Yes. So their ability to cross over here requires that they have some type of, there be some type of interaction between what is the fundamental makeup of our universe and whatever technology they have. So like one of the ideas that I was talking about during the break is that some strange metal that's bendable and is unrecognizable to material scientists may just come into being from the energy and matter in the area of where they came into our universe. Like this thing could just basically be
the nature of their tech basically generates some kind
build stuff over here out of our universe's stuff.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, there's so many aspects to this thing. You just touched on something that popped in my mind. We talk about this possibly being non-extraterrestrial, right? We're talking about these interdimensional, or time being a dimension. A time traveler would still be interdimensional, but crash retrieval material. There have been there was an incident in 1953 in Ubatuba, Brazil, and there was material recovered that was 99.88% pure magnesium.
Yeah.
That would have been virtually impossible to produce on this planet at that time. In subsequent years, it could have been done. It would have been extremely difficult, and it would have taken special facilities to be a very select few could have done it. And the fact that this happened in, Brazil makes that highly unlikely that it was a hoax perpetrated by somebody. So in other words, this is, it's part of the periodic table. It's not some magical material that doesn't exist in our realm. It's an actual metal that we're aware of, but we couldn't produce it here at that time. Right. So that lends to the suggestion that it's extraterrestrial, because there are other planets where that would be much more, planets with, let's say, higher gravity that could have made producing such a material easier.
Yeah.
Naturally. Of course, they could have been manufactured, which then that throws a wrench in that theory. And bottom line, here's the other thing that we talked about during the break, is that we're trying to take all of these different phenomena, plural, and trying to lump it into one thing, like, this is what it is. Well, we may be trying to fit pieces together that don't go together. We've got two different model cars, and we're trying to shove all the parts in to create one car out of two different ones.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
There is no doubt that certain percentage of these cases are military technology.
Yeah.
It's entirely possible that a certain percentage are non-physical, and another part could be extraterrestrial. Or that may be why we can't get to the bottom of it, because we're trying to find one answer.
But let's say that some of this is extraterrestrial, and that some of it is non-physical. Well, the extraterrestrials would also have encounters with the non-physical aspect, probably. Right? On wherever they live, they are probably having, and have had for thousands of years, encounters with the non-physical aspect.
Yeah,
and maybe
here in ships.
Maybe their bureaucracies work a little better than ours do, and they were like, "Hey, let's check this out." And so they're utilizing some of that understanding.
I hate to bring up things that are this fringe, but some people have reported observing different forms of entities. You've got your Nordics, which are the blonde-haired, human-looking,
tall whites,
entities, right?
Grays.
You've got the grays. There's different grays. There's the
tall
mantis,
grays and the short
right?
grays,
The tall mantis, the short. Those could be drones. It's hard to say, but there are various different types of entities that have been described. Again, one possibility is that it's manipulation of our perception, and there's nothing. What we're seeing is a construct of our own mind that they actually may not appear anything like what we perceive them to appear like. But the other possibility is maybe they are different species.
Yeah.
Maybe some are from one place and they've existed long enough that they know that's just the way it is, and they're fully aware of these non-physical entities, and maybe they coexist. I mean, it's hard to say.
Yeah.
I don't know, but that's a great looking tinfoil business suit you're wearing.
This is a
just
very
level up from the hat there, buddy.
That's right. And I think that all the descriptions of the various entities could point to, like you said, that this isn't all one thing. And I think of the Fae, the fairy stuff. Like, I know you talk about fringe. There's a fringe topic, but man, some of those encounters are so similar.
Floating entities.
That's right. Abductions. They move in circles. Lights in the woods. I mean,
time travel.
They move. They travel through walls and things like that. So.
And they happen to be associated with magnetic anomalies and mounds.
Right. And buzzing sounds. There's a lot of the same high strangeness aspects that show up. And those, if you really look at that, those things they're from here, right? At least that's what the appearance is. They live here. They always have, but they're like shifted or something. I don't know how to say it right, but they're not quite all the way in our realm. But they are here all the time, But they're alien to us, nevertheless.
It's like I said, the more I learn, the less I know about this phenomenon. Because just as soon as you find some new piece of data, it only opens up 100 new questions.
Yeah. That's right.
We're not getting it realistically. We're not getting any closer to a solution. Although I will say this, Valet, I've heard him quote that although it may seem like we're not getting closer to a ultimate solution, he said he uses an analogy of comparing it to cancer. He goes, we're not necessarily trying to cure cancer as one thing. We're trying to cure certain cancers, and one after another, you're getting closer and closer to being able to cure all of them. And so he's looking at this as trying to solve certain facets of the phenomenon.
Yeah,
Although
it's too complicated to try to solve as a whole. Yeah.
What would be nice though is if we could unify our questions, as a society, so you've got like what you just went through, the whole show about all these bureaucracies and all of the things they're trying to do and all of their motives, and then the public at large and all the different ways that people have been either led to believe or due to the way information has been disseminated, the way they think about it. It would be nice if we were all asking the same questions and seeking those answers. You see what I'm saying?
Well, just imagine. I mean,
that's pie in the sky.
We're sitting here speculating on all these different possibilities, right? And we're doing this with the benefit of 70 plus years of research or of data that's been accumulated to formulate these theories from. Imagine sitting in the Pentagon in 1947 and trying to have this conversation. They don't even have much of a basis to go on unless they have some form of tangible physical evidence.
Yeah.
And even then, just because you have a piece of material, that doesn't necessarily tell you where it came from, how it was manufactured, what their intent. I'm going to bring up one other aspect of this that I think is pretty important. The military's responsibility is to protect our country.
Yeah.
And whenever there are incursions of unknown objects into our airspace, it is their job to assume that it's hostile until proven otherwise.
That's right.
Right? They're not going to, go ahead and fly over that nuclear facility as long as you don't mess with it. No,
right.
They can't take that position.
No. Shoot first, shoot again, and then ask questions about the shooting.
Right. It's right. Yeah. So I don't see any obvious attempt to create a defense system to protect us from this type of
that
incursion.
is pretty strange.
So does that suggest that either it doesn't pose a threat, or is it that they already know there's nothing they can do about it anyway? Although I don't think that would be the case, because no matter what, you'd at least try.
Well, I have very little faith in bureaucracy to do kind of stuff like that. What I would assume that a bureaucracy would do is if it came upon something that it completely couldn't understand, is it would say that it didn't exist. That's
what they did.
Yeah. Yeah. Rather than tangle with it, what you don't want is to try to be dealing with something that you can't understand. You've thrown all these scientists at it, and they're like, we don't know what this is, or this is something really weird. Then the best answer is to say it isn't real. Everyone who says they see this is imagining it. That way we don't have to do anything about it.
But then you have like the military mind, which is, can we use that?
Yeah. Yeah. Can we use this to make things blow up?
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Well, like the pure defense of the country. Like, how do we use that to defend the country?
Yeah.
Well, the irony of this, we talked about this earlier. I pointed out that early on, talking 1947, immediately following Kenneth Arnold's sighting, or if the Roswell crash actually occurred, the initial response was, we don't know what's going on, we're researching it.
Yeah.
Shortly after that, it changed, and they started trying to, write off sightings as military aircraft. They were using military technology to as an excuse for the sightings.
Yeah.
Possibly they took the whatever materials
and there's an advantage
and they used that to exploit the technology, and now we've reached a point where they're using UFO sightings to write off military technology.
Yeah.
There's an advantage.
UFO sightings are still happening, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe they're using that. Maybe that's what's going on right now. In other words, the Navy is talking about Tic Tacs and physical material as to implant the idea that maybe they really are extraterrestrial craft
when it's actually
our own tech.
Yeah.
Although, here's the thing. That kind of psyop might work on the general population, but any, halfway, respectable adversary, take any of the other superpowers.
Yeah,
they're going to know exactly what's going on. They know more. They know far more about what our government's up to than what we do.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. That as long as your intelligence tells you that our enemies also don't know what's going on, there's an advantage to spinning it that it's our own military technology, right? But if you find out through intelligence that the other intelligence agencies of your adversaries have also found out what this really is, then it no longer serves you to spin it to your own public as our own technology. Now you need to move it out to say, well, we've got parts and we've discovered stuff and we're working on it.
Yeah.
Because you know that your adversary also knows it's not ours and it's not theirs. And you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Well, the Senate hearings have kind of suggested that the Navy or our military is saying that they're concerned that this could be foreign tech, or that it could be alien or extraterrestrial or whatever from wherever, but that our adversaries might try to use or use that technology, try to glean information from that technology to use against us. So they're not really saying it. Honestly, I don't think. My initial reaction to the New York Times reports was, wow, I can't believe they're saying this. But the more I've thought about it, it's just more of the same story they've been feeding us. Just hadn't repeated it for a while.
That one you sent me, the second one, where they were saying, do we believe in UFOs is the wrong question. In that one, they straight up state, no, they are saying this is definitely not adversarial technology, whatever it is.
Yeah, that is true. It does say that, but is that entirely different than what they said in the Life article? If
no,
it was generally
no.
In other words, we know the Air Force was the one feeding Life the information.
Yeah,
and they're saying that this really legitimately could be extraterrestrial.
Yeah, yeah.
So
in this case, what they seem to be saying is that whatever it is, because they said in the article, they said this doesn't necessarily mean aliens. They said that, but it also is definitely not adversarial country technology.
It does not It does not originate in any foreign country or something.
Yeah, so that's why I start thinking of crypto-terrestrials or breakaway civilizations or something that is here.
It's sort of
Antarctica, bro.
Yeah. Or maybe they said it doesn't necessarily mean aliens because what they're trying to tell people is we don't know what this is. We have determined that it's not this and it's not this, but that doesn't mean it means aliens. We just know it's not Chinese, it's not Russian, whatever. Right.
That just seems so unlikely, but it's also would seem unlikely that they would actually acknowledge that they don't know after 70 years of studying it.
That's why I was bringing up because our intelligence agencies are constantly spying on the other intelligence agencies and what they know.
Yeah.
So once you find out that our adversaries have found out that it's not our tech, they now know the most top secret stuff that we know, that this is not from anything we know on the planet. Now we know that our adversaries also know that. Now we can't continue to put out this idea that we know what it is, or that it's our own tech or anything like that, right? Because they know it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they'll think we're fooled.
Yeah.
I would say the only thing you can be assured of is that they're not telling us everything they know.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm saying. Everyone's lying to us,
Right.
folks.
It's not. They're not being all of a sudden being
The
completely.
phenomena
honest.
is lying to us. The government's lying to us. Everything is lying
It's
to
all
us.
a conspiracy.
That's right.
I'm lying to myself. No, I'm not.
The Grand
No.
Watcher is flipping out right now.
It's cool, Grand Watcher.
But there is a document trail that shows that there was a conspiracy even within the government, even within the Pentagon.
Yeah.
There were conspiracies.
They were conspiring
against
against each other.
themselves. Yes.
That's classic. Classic government crap right there. Oh man.
So we're planning to continue this conversation at some point.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of other areas we didn't touch on.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting documentary that I kind of turned the guys on to that I thought was something we really need to talk about at some point, because it shows a completely different dimension of this phenomenon, something that we maybe kind of danced around it in this conversation, but we didn't really get into too much detail. And then there are a bunch of sightings that I pulled up as a result of last week's conversation, especially talking about like the Hudson Valley sightings. I think there is a sizable percentage of people that have heard about the Hudson Valley sightings and assume that they're military, some type of military tech. I was one of those. I was fairly convinced that it was some form of military technology. But as you
What,
start...
you thought the military had like football-sized triangles?
Well,
Football field-sized triangles.
We really don't know what state-of-the-art technology is right now. We have an idea of what some might be,
Yeah.
but
It's like Laird said, like, we have no idea. Like,
Yeah.
they've gone way beyond what
Right.
they've let us know.
that's where
was interesting.
Where
Yeah.
cases like like the Tehran UFO in 1976, that one's a pretty good indicator of where our technology was at that time.
Tehran, is that the one you're
Yes.
talking about? Yeah.
Yeah, in other words, we tried to rescue. I've got a lot of detail that I was going to cover, but we'll have to do that.
We'll
in
get into
another
the
episode. But
next episode.
But bottom line, out of desperation in trying to rescue the hostages, we resorted to Wile E. Coyote tech, the Air Force attempted to strap 30 rockets on a C-130 aircraft because the only landing strip the only suitable place to land was a soccer stadium. So they wanted to be able to fly the C-130s in here.
Oh, the rockets were pointing the other way.
They had them both ways. They had 8 rockets pointed forward to decelerate. They'd load the hostages in, turn around, and then fire the rockets to
other 8,
accelerate to
yeah.
get out. Well, they did a couple of test flights, and then, of course, the first full power test failed spectacularly. And, that went down the tubes. And so did Carter's presidency. So it would seem to me that if we had the technology,
If we had our own flying saucers.
in 1976, if the craft that was having its way with the Iranian Air Force,
Yeah.
and freezing their weapon systems and doing all this stuff, if we had it then, we would have used it 2 years later to extract the hostages.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good argument to be made in a lot of cases. It's like if we have this tech and we've had it for so long, because this has been talked about, that they've either been reverse engineering stuff or they've been building all this stuff themselves and they have all this tech. Well, what's the point of building all these things if you don't ever get to use them?
Yeah, and and like another, getting back on the Hudson Valley sightings, just because that one's pretty important because of the number of witnesses involved. We're talking somewhere upwards of 8,000 witnesses over a 9-year period or so, or 6-year period. Some of the stranger aspects of that is the fact that there were inconsistencies regarding what was being observed. Some people would see this big V. Some people saw a check mark. Some people saw discs.
Yeah.
And it could have been relative to the position.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what I thought. But I have found reports of other sightings that described in detail not only the appearance, the checkmark aircraft, but the rotating in place going back to the 50s. In other words, these individuals described the exact same thing that was seen in the Hudson Valley in the 80s.
Yeah.
And we know good and well there was no way we had that technology in the 50s.
Right.
You know, large craft that could just sit motionless in the sky and rotate and tumble on end. You know, that's another not commonly reported aspect of the giant triangle sightings, is that very often they're seen vertical.
Yeah.
The points are pointed down. In other words, and they'll just sit motionless like that. Like if there was a crew on board, how, you know, that doesn't make sense.
And then it flattens out and you're like, wait, where's everyone standing? You know, if there's people in there. Yeah.
You know, and another little thing I know that Linda reported, mentioned sightings of rectangular craft.
Yeah.
That one, if I was going to bet on it, that one is most likely military. And I'll tell you why. I've mentioned to you guys, back in the 90s, I was an administrator of a forum for the Encounters television show, the Fox TV show, Encounters. There was a conspiracy forum. I was the administrator for that. And as a result, I would get a lot of people sending me private messages and giving me UFO reports, things they had seen. And most of them, they were interesting, but not necessarily anything that stood out in my mind. But there was one that I never forgot. And I had a guy that was out in the Mojave Desert. He was working on power lines. And he said he heard a couple of jets overhead and looked up, and he said, I saw what I can best describe as a flying door.
Wow.
He says it was the proportions of a door, very large, being escorted by 2 F-16s. He goes, I could hear the jets, and this thing, they were escorting it.
Yeah.
So that indicates it's most likely military. Well, as a result, I keep a very close watch for rectangle sightings.
Okay.
There's a website called the National UFO Reporting Center.
Yeah.
They list all these sightings. I did some statistics on that. They were like last year for 2019, there were 17.2 sightings per day in the United States.
Wow.
Just on that website, and figure that. I would venture to
only
bet
10% of people report or less.
In other words, exactly. How many people even know that website exists?
Yeah.
But there are quite a few rectangle sightings listed on there. I've also seen there's a website called or a YouTube channel called Suspect Sky.
Suspect Sky, yeah.
They had a very clear daylight footage clip of a rectangle, a black rectangle. It was an amazing video, and I think most people would look at that and go, "That's
fake.
Got to be fake."
Yeah.
And I think it's legitimate video. But the interesting thing about that is that those particular sightings of that type of craft, there is a very high percentage of those are in the same area, and they're right out of Fort Worth. And Lockheed has a plant in Fort Worth.
What are they doing with giant flying doors?
Well, they're not aerodynamic shapes.
Yeah.
They're blunt-ended. Wouldn't seem like it's not a lifting body shape. And,
wouldn't seem? Is that what you're saying?
Well,
I see what you're doing there. Like a wooden door?
Well,
wouldn't seem? Come on, guy.
You're throwing me off track.
I'm sorry. Keep going.
They may be using there was a report back in the 90s in Aviation Week magazine. They were talking about that there are currently aircraft being tested that fly by principles that we do not fully understand. It's a very vague explanation of we have no idea what we're seeing. It's possible that they're using some type of fields, plasma fields or something, to create aerodynamic shapes out of objects
air.
that do not appear to be aerodynamic.
Yeah.
So in other words, it may seem like, it must be anti-gravity, but it may not be. It's just using tech that we don't familiar with.
Yeah.
Okay, so pyramids can fly.
Yeah. Basically is what he's saying. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the tangent cube, so I'm going off on a tangent.
No, that's good. And I agree. Like there was something about that with what you said there sparked a memory in me about it's one of the stealth craft. That it has some strange field that happens on the tips.
The
forward.
B2,
yes.
The B2's claim to use, I believe it does. It uses some means of using like a plasma field to reduce
Drag.
the drag and may also play
Generate
into
some propulsion. Yeah.
Well, I don't know that I buy that aspect of it. I know it's talked about a lot, but I think it's probably more likely used to reduce its radar cross section.
Yeah.
I believe there were parts of that machine made right down the road from us, actually.
Really, I've seen one doing touch and goes. It was funny. I had my camera. I was out in Palmdale, and there was one doing touch and goes, and I immediately took my camera out to get pictures of it, and I could not figure out why my camera wouldn't focus on it. It's like. Infrared.
Yeah.
That would defeat the whole purpose for why it was designed.
So, final question: did you storm Area 51?
No, I don't. I do not believe that Area 51 has anything to do with aliens whatsoever.
Of course not. But I expected you to be there with your monster truck and your bicycle, trying to see them aliens.
I love riding out that direction, but no.
So you didn't practice Naruto running before? Okay, all right. I was trying to picture him doing the Naruto run, and I guess he didn't do it. Oh, well. Well, this has been great, man. Fantastic material. I know you got a bunch more notes, so we'll have to do follow-ups. So for everybody listening, we will be doing part 2 and part 3, or however many, until we get through all the material he's built, he's prepared. They won't necessarily be published in sequence, because we'll just have to do them whenever we can. But eventually we will get it done. So thanks so much.
I'm looking forward to it, man.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, before I get out of here, I do want to do one thing. I want to give a shout out to the Snake Force. Because that's how I ended up here. Lou and Butt Flapperton, Jeff, Tony, Janice, Levi, Flavortown, Frank. I mean, those guys, they're so knowledgeable. Everybody has their own little niche that they know a lot about. And it's so educational. Every time I go in there, I come out of there learning something. So I encourage everybody to jump into the Discord. It's awesome.
There you go. Join the Discord, folks.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much, dude. Yeah. It has been amazing, the journey. Yeah. And everybody joining the Discord and all the stuff that comes about. This is really awesome.
Yep.
So
it was a pleasure being here.
All right, man. Thanks. All right,
looking forward to next time.
That's right. You guys know all the website, email, and everything. Join the Patreon. Send us money.
We love you.
We always have. Good night, Adamu.
Snakes!
Tell him to get back to work.
Oh, yeah, I forgot.